Well, 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 wells. It's been a hot minute, hasn't it? It's almost been like, what, 2 months since the announcement of Resident Evil 4 Remake, and I can't stop thinking about it. Why would I? It's only a remake to my all-time favorite game. There's nothing special about it at all. Not one bit. To celebrate, I decided I wanted to do a video every month leading up to the release of the remake. Though this month has been a bit hectic for me and I haven't been able to focus on this channel as much as I would like to. But don't get me wrong, I have no shortage of things I want to talk about in relation to Resident Evil 4. This video is unfortunately going to be a short one because, again, life is a bitch. But you know what they say, when life gives you piss, call it lemonade and try not to think about it. This is more of a follow-up anyways to my last video, which, if you haven't seen, I suggest you watch it as it gives context to this one. However, if you don't want to watch it and just want a short summary, on the last episode of Digital Shinigami, I argued that my ideal remake would be one that followed the gameplay foundation of the original, not abandon it to do something completely different. Now, that hasn't changed. If we were talking about my ideal remake, the one that would be made if I had a say in the matter, then I would want one that builds off the combat foundation of the original Resident Evil 4. Thing is, I don't have a say. I'm just some nobody on the internet shouting into the void because it makes me feel better, I guess. I need to accept that the remake I want is probably not the remake I'm gonna get. So I sat here after my last video and thought about it more. If I can't get the remake I want, what would I be fine with getting instead? As well, I thought about what would be the worst direction this remake could take. One thing kept popping up in my head. Please, no middle grounds. Well, you might be sitting there and wondering, what do you even mean by that? Well, for starters, let me tell you what I don't mean. I don't mean not having a mix of action and horror. Resident Evil, since its inception, has always been a mix of horror and action, but it is rarely an equal mix of so. You either have the original trilogy, whose focus is on thick atmosphere, tension through anticipation, and exploration of an isolating and unfolding setting, and the action trilogy, which focuses on high-intensity combat encounters and moving you from fight to fight. Both these designs serve different purposes and have different strengths, and that's fine, but they run counter to each other. Both have different directions that aren't very compatible with each other, and this brings me to my argument here. If we aren't going to get a game that follows the action thriller vibes of the original and is going to tone down the gameplay to achieve something more slow-paced and scary, they need to really lean into it and make a great horror experience in place of the gameplay that defined the original release. Go all in and make a tense and atmospheric horror game. I mean it, a middle ground is the worst thing they could do with this remake. If this game tries to go for a middle ground, it will ultimately end up as an experience that neither satisfies as a horror game or a third-person action thriller. I'm not worried about this being a bad game because most Resident Evil games in general are good, but at their best, they are honestly some of the greatest horror games I've played. And I genuinely mean that. I have played quite a bit in the genre. These are the ones I enjoy playing the most. And I would even go as far to say that the best Resident Evil games set a bar so high that good just isn't good enough. I'm looking for greatness, and the problem with trying to do a middle ground is that the more you try to please everyone, the less likely you make something that's truly memorable because nothing is refined or fleshed out enough to be truly great. Now, this opinion doesn't just come out of nowhere, and this brings me to my main example, Resident Evil Village. Now, I know, this is about the, third time I've ragged on this game at this point, but it really is the perfect example of how being a jack of all trades and a master of none hurts a game. Keyword hurts, because in good conscience, I can't say it's a bad game, but on that same note, I have no problem saying it's a weak Resident Evil game. The thing is that this game excelled in nothing. except maybe the character and art design, and a few standout moments. But from a gameplay perspective, this game was lacking, and the answer to it is very simple. This game tried to play the middle ground, and I get it. Resident Evil has a bit of a split fan base because of the different styles of gameplay within the franchise. It was an admirable attempt trying to make something that was a middle ground between the two main play styles of the series, but in the process they made something that didn't represent the best aspects of either style. Now, when I say two gameplay styles, I'm simplifying it, but there really is only two main styles of Resident Evil game within the main series. I know people might disagree because of Resident Evil 7, but that was really just a classic Resident Evil game in a first-person perspective. But oh no, people found it too scary and hence they had to tone it down for Resident Evil 8. You know, because it's not like it's a horror game. And it's not like, that's kind of the point of horror games. Resident Evil 7 has its flaws, but at least it had a focus. Even if that focus kind of got lost by like the last act of the game. But those first 3/4, fucking fantastic. Because they were uncompromising in their design and intention. It's deliberately paced to make you feel a sense of dread as you go through this Texas Chainsaw inspired house and fight these mutant redneck psychopaths. Meanwhile, we jumped to Resident Evil 8 and it was just all over the place because it wanted to be both classic Resident Evil and Resident Evil 4, but the irony of this situation is that by trying to do these things in equal measure, they cancel each other out, as opposed to having a focus on one element and using the other to complement it. Like, it tried to have the relentless pacing of Resident Evil 4, but without any of the combat mechanics that made that game so fun to play. Because it was trying to have that unrelentless pacing of 4, it couldn't have a great sense of exploration or puzzle solving because that would make things too slow for an action game. And what do we end up with as the final product? Well, a game that either implements core aspects of old Resident Evil games' design in the most shallow ways, or implements surface level support features without the core gameplay that made those mechanics work in the first place. Like, when you think about it, 8 has some of the most limiting map and level design. During the parts of the game that matter, everything is self-contained and straightforward in where you go and what you do. The closest any main level in that game comes to having any sense of exploration is Lady D's castle and Heisenberg's factory. And even then, they ain't very hard to navigate and explorative, especially when compared to, like, the best games in this series. Or, to be more specific, the best games within this style in this series. So what do they do in place of this? They relegate all the exploration to item hunting in between the main sections of the game, which creates a very repetitive structure of going to boss area, which often is very constricting when you explore it, and then come back to the town to do some extra shit before doing it all again. These parts of the game feel so separated because nothing you do in the side town segments has much of any effect on your actual progress, whereas in good classic Resident Evil games, that's not the case. Exploration isn't something you can do, it's the point. Being left in these locations, overwhelmed by threats, learning the best routes to travel for either avoiding enemies or speedrunning, hunting for as many resources as possible while cleverly balancing your inventory, finding items and solving the mystery as to what they do. All that is key to classic Resident Evil design. It's not something you can do if you're bored or want to kill some time or in between the main segments of the game. It's how you play the game. You literally cannot beat the game if you don't explore and keep notes of what you find and where you find it and learning how to navigate its threats. It forces you to think and problem solve and plan out your actions and learn the best ways to travel through whatever location you're in, whether it be a mansion, police station, Raccoon City, a creepy Texas Chainsaw inspired house. Resident Evil 8 turns that into a useless side activity for just getting more cash to build up your arsenal, and that's it. Now, Resident Evil 4 did the same thing, but here's where it differs. It replaced the lack of exploration with meaningful combat. See, combat in the original games didn't matter because exploration was the point, and as well as resource management. If you're playing these games right, you're not avoiding combat, but strategically choosing when to engage in it based on how many resources you want to conserve, or feel you need to conserve, or feeling like you have no other option but to use your resources. Combat is mostly a numbers game in these games, and that's fine because again, it's about making you choose when you think it's worth even engaging in it in the first place. And that's all great, it works for that style of game, but Resident Evil 4 has a completely different focus. And though that focus sacrifices core aspects of the original games, it does so with purpose, and an understanding that they wanted to prop up the combat. This is why the lack of puzzle solving and exploration isn't a problem in 4 like it is in 8. It was a conscious choice to put a focus on the game's best aspect. This breakneck pacing works because Resident Evil 4 has the combat to support it. There's depth here, a learning curve that propels players to get better and best learn how to handle these combat encounters. I've discussed this more in detail on 2 separate occasions now, so I won't get into the whole spiel again, but just the fact that you can do more with the pistol in this game than you can do with the entire arsenal of Resident Evil 8 is the most scathing argument I can ever make against this game's combat. And this brings me back to my main point. The pacing and exploration that defines one era of Resident Evil and the bombastic action that defines the other just don't really mix. So of course, when you try to have both of these things in equal measure, both styles get cancelled out. They mute each other out. You ultimately get a game that, sure, on its own might be a decent action horror experience, but as part of the Resident Evil series, it's severely lacking, and I'm not the first one to bring this up. Having a focus matters. Having something that you want to accomplish, a specific goal, it centers your game design around something. When your focus is to have a middle ground, to create something that pleases everyone or pleases as many people as possible, it is less likely that they develop any aspect of the game to be truly great. Now, I say all this, but understand I could be proven wrong. For all I know, they can strive exactly for a middle ground and actually pull it off in a way that satisfies me. It wouldn't be the first game I liked that had an equal mix of action and horror, but games like that are few and far between. Look, I know what I'm saying has no scientific basis, and really, how do you measure this stuff objectively? I don't know. I'm just a shit talker on the internet. I do think it's something you feel though, and I neither felt the dread of horror or the thrill of combat in Resident Evil 8. And the only explanation that comes to my mind is how it just didn't flesh out any aspect well enough to be all that good. I can imagine plenty of people who would be fine with a Resident Evil 4 remake that felt like Resident Evil 8. I do know there are those who want a scarier Resident Evil 4, and honestly, the more I think about it, having both a scary version of Resident Evil 4 and the action original would be a cool prospect. But I really do feel like if it tries to strive for a middle ground, it will leave fans of the original Resident Evil 4 and those who want a scarier version of Resident Evil 4 dissatisfied. I mean, then again, what the fuck do I know? I'm just talking shit. Sure, I'm talking shit about something I'm very passionate about, but it's talking shit nonetheless. What do you think about the things I said in this video? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comment section below, or by leaving a like, or subscribing. You know, all the good stuff that helps a small channel like this grow. But, yeah, I'm gonna go play in traffic now. I'll see you all later. Bye. What makes a good remake? This is a tricky question because there is no right or wrong answer. It can be anything from a faithful and mostly same retelling of the original, designed